I got. Sorry, lots of stuff going on here.
David, we're getting a lot of feedback from someone here.
Sorry, I'm doing what I can here. Okay, we have our two debaters. All right. So, alright, so this is gonna be both of our debaters. I need to switch off to. Okay, I see. Mike. Okay, so real quick, we are about ready to go live. Um, Ethan, you want to tilt your camera down a bit. You are very. There's a lot of headroom on you. A little bit more. A little bit less. Sorry. I'm sorry. I can barely hear you. I'm sure it'll be better when I'm off. Headroom wise, guys, let's see here. I'm gonna try and give you an example. You want to be kind of like that. Yeah. We're gonna be cutting off kind of the bottom and zooming in. So yeah, headroom like that, maybe yeah. And I will gonna mute myself and then like point when we're live, okay? I'm gonna try and count down and with hand motions, all right? This is gonna be interesting.
Yes, done.
We are live.
question. Each candidate has a minute for each question, and then we'll turn to the audience questions, and then we'll close with the candidate statements again, 2 minutes each. We couldn't flip a coin because we're not together to determine who goes first. So we'll give one candidate the first word here, and then another candidate the last word. So Ethan, why don't you take us, kick us off with a 2-minute opening statement?
Absolutely, and thank you so much, Andrew. Thank you, CJ, and everyone else today for joining us. What obviously is an unconventional situation. Let me just tell you all at the outset why I'm running for district attorney, and then I want to talk about what my vision is for the county and how we should address these challenging times as we lead into a more substantive discussion of many of the issues that are near and dear to the hearts of people who care about criminal justice. You know, I'm running for Multnomah County District Attorney because I believe that the elected district attorney must provide proven, credible leadership based on experience and must have a sustained vision for how we are going to address the needs of the justice system in the coming months and years ahead. And I believe I'm that person. Now, at the outset, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge what we're all facing, both personally and collectively, which is a social and political landscape that looked very different than it did when Mike and I started this campaign. And the simple reality is that the challenging job of Multnomah County Attorney has gotten considerably more challenging. And that
A lot of digital artifacts of audio, digital audio artifacts on air.
Yeah, I'm trying to think this through to improve the audio quality because you're getting it from me, which is program, which is audio, which is coming in, program that, which is into, which is in one there. Yes.
Do you want this up as a monitor?
Yes, sorry. Yeah.
Adjust a fair path.
I need that.
All of the stakeholders and everybody else I've dealt with in the
Input
system.
one
But
is.
more importantly, during that time, what I've also done is try to integrate that and work with an understanding of the larger community. I grew up here. I'm raising my family here, and I believe that Portland and Multnomah County is a unique and special place, and I hope to serve its needs for years to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ethan. Mike, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew and CJ, and thanks to the City Club for providing us a little bit of attempted normalcy in what is a very challenging time for a lot of folks. And I want to acknowledge all the workers who are still serving our community under these really trying times. Welcome to my basement. Good to have you here with me. So let me tell you why I'm running for district attorney. I believe fundamentally we need major reform now. I started off my career as a public school teacher in New Orleans, and up close I saw the school to prison pipeline. So when I went to law school, I thought I could study criminal law and become the change from within the system. I got a job at the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office in 2007 and stayed on until 2013. And during that time, I definitely felt like I was helping people. But at the same time, I didn't feel like I was changing the system. And in fact, by the time I was done, I kind of felt like the system was starting to change me. I got out and decided to work at the state level on criminal justice efficiency and effectiveness and reform work. Since that time, I've been appointed by Governor Kitzhaber to be the director of a state agency. I've managed a state agency for over the last 5 years now, and in my tenure, I've tripled my staff and almost tripled my budget to $90 million, making investments around the state into criminal justice, into solutions to get at the root causes of criminal justice issues. When you see that our jails and our prisons are our largest homeless shelters and mental health and treatment facilities, you know that we've been making the wrong investments for a long time. I started off this campaign with a detailed 28-point platform that I encourage you to go look at. But to begin with, you need a DA who's going to stand up to immigration and ICE and keep our immigrant community safe. You need a district attorney who's going to hold police officers accountable. They have an incredibly difficult job, and they do it with incredible valor. But when they break the law, they need to be held to account just like everybody else. And finally, people who get caught up in the criminal justice system need to be given a little bit of hope that they can turn things around. So I hope that in May, you vote for me for DA.
Thanks very much, Mike. We're going to dive into a lot of those issues that both of you raised now, but I think we'll start with the fact that we are in an unprecedented situation with COVID-19. As you know, numerous people who are incarcerated have tested positive in multiple states. There's an ongoing debate about how district attorneys, corrections departments, and others should be handling this crisis. And so our question for you is, what steps should DAs take to reduce the potential exposure for people to the virus, whether that's declining to prosecute offenses, delaying things, or taking other proactive action to protect public health? And Mike, we'll start with you.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely true. I think prosecutor can really do three major things. Right now, I think it's time to call for an end to jury trials like they've done in other states. In Washington, I just saw the Supreme Court justice put out that notification. Asking people to be in tight jury situations is risking everybody's lives and safety. There's no need for that right now. If this isn't good cause for postponement of trials, I don't know what is. Step two, I think that the prosecutor should look at not prosecuting certain cases at this moment. DAs across the country have been calling for a moratorium, a pause on prosecuting certain cases, low-level, nonviolent, misdemeanor, and some property cases, because we also have to realize not only do we have what's in our system right now, but everything that we still are charging and prosecuting, or even if we're delaying it for 6 months, that's all going to come back to hurt us 6 months from now. And finally, I think we need to support our jails and the leaders in our community. We need to get people out of jail and prison. There are 700 people right now that are on the 3 months away from exiting DOC. Let's get them out today.
Thank you, Mike. Ethan. Oh, Ethan, I think you're muted. We'll restart the clock. There we go. Thank you.
Thank you. Our number one priority needs to be keeping people safe. So that means effectively changing the way we administer justice in a way that separates people and reduces the risk of infection. As a district attorney, I would do much of what the office is doing now and what the U.S. Attorney's Office is doing, which is move toward a virtual setting and trying to ensure that folks don't come into the system. The second piece, and Mike alluded to this, is obviously delaying and not prosecuting some crimes in the interim to protect as many people as possible and reduce the number of folks coming in the system. But lastly, I want to talk about what we should do more of. You know, there is a spike in the number of folks seeking domestic violence assistance right now. We can't forget about the most vulnerable folks in our community during this time, while we're also protecting and delaying prosecution. So I would focus on those high-need victim groups like domestic violence survivors. I'd also focus on the victims of fraud prompted by this great human tragedy we're all experiencing. We've seen a spike in the number of folks taking advantage of people because of this. And so I'd look at the victims, and I'd also look at the needs of society at large.
Okay, thank you for that answer, Ethan. I'm going to be presenting the next question. I'm sure you all are both familiar with the American Bar Association's Rule 3.8 that lays out a role of a minister of justice for a prosecutor. It states, Rule 3.8, Section 1 states, the prosecutor has the responsibility of a minister of justice and not simply that of an advocate. This responsibility carries with it specific obligations to see the defendant is accorded procedural justice, the guilt is decided upon the basis of sufficient evidence, and that special precautions are taken to prevent and rectify the conviction of innocent persons. The extent of mandated remedial action is a matter of debate and varies in different jurisdictions. And we happen to find ourselves in a debate for this jurisdiction for our next Multnomah County District Attorney. My question is, have you reflected on the special role of a prosecutor? And what does it mean for you both philosophically and in practice? And I believe we're doing something where one person answers first and then the other person answers first. So in that regard, I'll put that question to you.
Great, thank you so much. You know, nothing is more important than the role you just alluded to as a prosecutor, because at the end of the day, what matters most is the integrity that we bring to the job, and that's why that rule matters so much. I'll give you a little bit of background. You know, I actually chaired the State Bar's Ethics Committee, which was responsible for promulgating Oregon's rules of professional responsibility and working with that ABA set of rules. So I'm intimately familiar with that rule and its importance. But I think the real issue is, how do we carry ourselves as prosecutors? You know, and I've spent 20 years doing my best to meet the community standards and the legal profession standards to meet that burden. And, you know, I think we can talk about rules and we can talk about numbers, but at the end of the day, you know, we have to have credibility in the community. And that's what that rule means to me. And that's what, more importantly, the role of being a prosecutor means. It means being fair. It means not being political. And it means working on behalf of the community you represent. And that's why I'm a prosecutor. And that's why I'm running for district attorney.
All right. Thank you, Ethan. And to you, Mike, as well.
Yeah, thanks, CJ. So I think there are some things that are very specific that a district attorney can do to this regard. At the Criminal Justice Commission, the agency that I run, one of the things that I've taken great pride in is making the data transparent in our state system, where you can now go online and look at prison rates and by demographics and recidivism and crime rates. I think we need a district attorney's office that's going to do the exact same thing. That's going to make transparent what's actually happening in the office so the community can weigh in on what's happening. Second, I'd like to set up a conviction integrity unit. These are units that are being set up in district attorney's offices across the country to not only consider old convictions, let's be honest, forensic science changes over time. If we have convicted people previously on bad science, that's something that we ought to look at again. And we should also look at the sentences that we were sending people to prison for in the 90s when crime was at a high point and determine whether or not those things still make sense for public safety. Washington State just passed a law that would allow district attorneys to do just that and look at sentences that were passed previously. So those are some ideas.
Thank you both so much. We've received word from the YouTube audience that there were some audio challenges at the beginning. I apologize. You missed me prattling on for a while, so I'm not going to do that. But you also might have missed Ethan's open or part of Ethan's open. So in the interest of fairness, Ethan, I want to give you a chance to speak again to the extent that you care to, what your opening statement was and what has you in this race, and then we'll continue on with the questions.
No, absolutely. At the risk of boring the folks who already did hear this, let me just say thank you so much, obviously, for having us all here today. And let me tell you just briefly why I'm running for Multnomah County District Attorney and what I think this office should be and is today, and what my vision is for Multnomah County in the coming months and years. Let me just say at the outset that I'm running for District Attorney because I believe that Multnomah County needs credible, thoughtful leadership in the area of criminal justice to most fairly change where change is needed, and more importantly, to fix what's needed with the credibility and experience in the system. And that's what I bring to the table. Now, at the outset, obviously, I would be remiss if I didn't mention what is obvious to all of us and what is animating, I think, the answers to many of our questions today. And that is the social and political crisis we're all experiencing with respect to the COVID-19 virus. That will impact every area of life, and it will have a profound effect on not only the administration of justice, but it will have a profound effect on all of our public sector going forward. And it will present unique challenges. And I think I'm uniquely positioned to meet those challenges. I'll just tell you a little bit about my story. I grew up here in Portland. I'm raising my family here, and I love this community a great deal. And I've spent 20 years as a public advocate on behalf of this county and this community as a state and federal prosecutor, handling virtually every type of crime that touches our system, the smallest crimes to the biggest crimes we've had in Oregon State history. And I hope to take that message, that experience, and that vision to fix what needs to be fixed with our stakeholders, but more importantly, equitably and fairly administer the district attorney's office in a way that props up and ensures the public trust that is so important to being the district attorney. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ethan. And sorry about that, everybody. Getting back to the questions at hand, CJ teed up the sort of unique role that a prosecutor has, and the Multnomah County prosecutor, of course, is perhaps unique among that subset in that it's the most populous county in the state and often looked to for leadership. You both have had differing opinions on how you would engage, or if you would engage, with the Oregon District Attorneys Association. And so I'd love to ask each of you to explain what your position is. In other words, whether you would participate, and more importantly, what that says about how you think the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office is positioned to be a statewide advocate. And Mike, we'll start with you for this.
Yeah, so I've said previously that if pressed, I would pull out of the District Attorneys Association, and I stand by that. I'm running on a platform of major progressive change. I've worked in Salem for the last 6 years, and I've seen all kinds of legislative reform talked about, tried, and I've seen over and over where the District Attorneys Association has tended to line up. When I'm talking about things like needing to reform mandatory sentencing, cash bail, the death penalty, issues like that, I just fundamentally do not believe that the Oregon District Attorneys Association agrees with the policy positions that I'm taking, and that if elected, that the people of Multnomah County are taking. Therefore, I think it would be disingenuous for me to spend county funds to pay for a lobbyist that would then go and lobby against the very positions I've stated that I would take. Will I work with the district attorneys? I have a lot of respect for the men and women who are elected across the state. They care deeply about public safety. I would absolutely find ways to work with them, and where their values and their focus is aligned with the voters of Multnomah County, I'd look forward to working with them.
And obviously, I take a different view. I believe fundamentally in collaboration. And when we talk about making the changes that need to be made, I think that only gets done effectively and fairly and at all if Multnomah County is in the room. And I think there's an aspect of leadership there that, for example, when we talk about cash bail, which I agree with Mike needs to be eliminated, you can't do that when you're looking outside in at the rest of the district attorneys in the state. And, I've been out of the state system for 12 years, and so I'm not looking to pick political fights with anyone. My view is that to be a fair steward of Multnomah County and a leader in the state, I have a responsibility to walk into that room as the district attorney of the largest community in the state of Oregon and help lead a group to talk about what the priorities should be and are. And that's exactly what I would do, not only in Salem, in the limited role we play down there, but in this community, in Multnomah County. I would look to reach out to all groups, not just the ones that are my natural allies, but everyone, in trying to forge a more fair, honest, and just criminal justice system.
Thank you both.
All right. Thank you both for your responses on those questions. To our next question, the Multnomah County DA's mission page currently states the district, one sentence of the mission. The district attorney's office is committed to open and balanced administration of justice, one that honors and respects diversity in all of its forms. On the issue of diversity, and particularly race, we know that for generations, the American criminal justice system has been steeped in racism and discrimination in many forms. And Ava DuVernay's documentary 13th, she skillfully recreates the history of racism in the American criminal justice system since its creation during slavery as a way of controlling Black people. A significant amount of racism is baked into every level of prosecution, including which neighborhoods police are placed in, what is considered legal and illegal, how crimes are charged, how juries are selected, and how DAs leverage plea bargaining. My question for you both is, can you tell voters how you plan to identify, redress, and eliminate systemic racism? And the follow-up to that is, how will you measure the results as you seek to operationalize those issues, operationalize the elimination of systemic racism? That first is to Ethan, going in the reverse order of the last question.
Thank you. I think there are a few questions as important as addressing, systemic racism in the justice system. Not only because, the pervasive impact it's had for generations, but because it matters so much to the credibility of the justice system for everyone. And that's a critical piece that I think we need to focus on. Now, specifically, what would I do? The report on racial and ethnic disparities in the criminal justice system has guided a lot of the thinking in the district attorney's office right now, and I would follow on to that. And that is identifying what points at which a district attorney can make changes to ensure there's fairness in the system. And a lot of that has to do with getting the right data, making sure that we can say to the community, look, we are getting fair or reasonable outcomes throughout the system. So first answer is transparency in that respect. And it's making sure we are focusing on what we can control having an impact there. Sentencing, plea offers, and making that information available to folks. And the second is leadership and conveying that the system belongs to everyone of all backgrounds, and that's critical.
So CJ, thanks for the question. So I got to visit and tour and stay overnight the prison in Angola, Louisiana, which Angola started off as a slave plantation. And I'll tell you, walking through that, it was absolutely crystal clear that what happened when slavery ended was that there were crimes and reasons invented to put Black people back on that plantation. When I started confronting this in my agency, this is an issue I've worked on a lot. I had my agency read The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, and we started to look at drug laws in the state of Oregon. And that's why in 2017, the legislature passed House Bill 2355 that not only set up a statewide review of racial profiling of law enforcement, which my agency is in charge of implementation, and then changed the drug laws because we saw who's using drugs and who's convicted of those drugs in our system are wildly disparate. So as DA, I'd make things transparent. I'd measure results just like I've done at the state level, build dashboards so that the community can hold the district attorney's office accountable to those changes.
Thank you both for your answers to those questions and for your work in those areas. I would like to ask a follow-up question that gets a little bit more specific to Multnomah County. So recent work, and Ethan, I believe you mentioned this, the recent work by Multnomah County's local public safety coordinating council. I'm having some issues with technology here, so I'm not sure if that was what you mentioned, Ethan, but I'll behave as if you did and move forward. Multnomah County's local public safety coordinating council and several other institutions have confirmed what Black, Latinx, and Indigenous communities have been saying for generations, that if you are of these races, you are likely to have experienced systemic racism by the justice system, and specifically by Multnomah County's DA's office, which plays a major role in our system. My question to you is, and you both mentioned ways that you would work to improve the system where systemic racism is regarded. But the specific question is, what will you as DA do to gather, legitimize the voice of and partner with communities who have been most harmed by these disparities in identifying institutional racism and fixing the system? And that's for you first, Mike.
Great, CJ. So first of all, I'd like to say, I'm proud to have the endorsement of many coalitions in this community that have been working on those issues for a long time. I was proud to partner with Unite Oregon, with Safety and Justice PAC, with Latino Network, with Pacoon on working on that legislation that I mentioned. All of those folks have endorsed me in this election. I would continue the same relationship that I've built with them over the years I'm working on these issues into the district attorney's office, and specifically looking at our policy manual. The Multnomah DA's office has about a 200-page policy manual. I think it starts there. We should go through that with a lens towards history and looking at what laws were created because of things that we don't like. Non-unanimous juries is a perfect example of a law that was racially motivated and created. Drug laws, another perfect example. So let's look through our policy manual and see, are we going to be actually addressing it when we know that we're building systemic racism right back into the system? And I've worked with the same partners that are supporting me in this race and that I've worked with all along.
Thank you. Well, obviously, a big piece is working with community partners to share that data and to sort of help along and explaining the transparency and that information so the communities are involved in the process. But I think the other piece that we haven't talked a lot about is ensuring that there's a diverse workforce. I mean, the reality is we need to do a better job of hiring diverse lawyers. It's been a long-standing challenge in the Oregon State Bar. I worked on that issue as former vice president of the bar. But I think, we'd go a long way to strengthening our ties with the community if we had more lawyers and people of color in the room on that side of the table, so that it's truly a collaborative process and folks understand that the justice system represents all backgrounds, not just in word only, but also in practice.
Great. Thank you both. Obviously, race permeates all of the issues that we've talked about in the criminal justice system. Another critical factor is poverty. As Robert Kennedy said 55 years ago, there's usually only one factor that determines whether a defendant stays in jail before he goes to trial, and it's not guilt or innocence. It's not the nature of the crime. It's not the character of the defendant. It's simply money. How much money does the defendant have? And as you both have noted, bail is a key factor in that, and it's been an issue of debate around the country. And so I have two questions on that. First, recognizing the burden that cash bail can impose on individuals, particularly low-income individuals, how are you approaching whether to seek cash bail? And also, how should prosecutors assess potential dangerousness or recidivism risk for defendants, if at all, when they're setting bail? Ethan, I think you're up first for this one.
Thanks. Great question. I mean, I agree that poverty is the single biggest problem in the system that we don't acknowledge or address. And I saw it on day one when I was shocked to see the number of both defendants and victims burdened by poverty. Now, specifically to address your question, what I would recommend doing is adopting a release schematic that essentially looks either like Washington, D.C., or more specifically like the Bail Reform Act in the federal system, which requires that there be a showing of dangerousness or risk of flight, and then the person be detained. I don't think that folks should just walk out the door, particularly with our domestic violence cases. That's incredibly dangerous. But that the burden be set perhaps at preponderance to show that indeed the person is a danger and they be held, but that money not play a role in that. And I'll just say as an aside, you know, the other piece we don't talk about enough is the burden that excessive fines and fees play in our system. Because that really is where poverty can be aggravated for folks who are on their way out of the system and have done what we've asked. And that's another thing we need to focus on.
Thank you. Mike.
So I am absolutely elated that Ethan has joined me on this position of the need to eliminate cash bail. So that's fantastic. You know, I've been talking about this not only from the start of the campaign, but I actually started by working on legislation in 2016 that I helped write that formed the Public Safety Task Force, whose sole mission is to look at whether or not retaining cash in our system serves the public interest, and specifically how it impacts communities of color and how we get disparate incomes. That task force, I'm proud to say, has been working for over 2 years. They've put out at least one report. I anticipate another report coming. I anticipate legislation coming up, hopefully in the next long session, to take on this issue statewide. I think there are some great models that we can learn from, and there have been some models across the country that we can learn from their mistakes. So we absolutely need to end it. Actuarial tools, you know, fundamentally, I do believe that we should be looking at actuarial tools to use for risk. But at the same time, we have to make sure that those tools are not just baking racism into our release decisions by putting people of color as high risk.
Thank you both. I'm going to ask one follow-up on this, because as with bail, plea bargaining often puts defendants in a weakened position to advocate for their right to trial. And it's particularly it can be a particularly challenging thing if you're a low-income defendant with associated collateral consequences. So my question is, how would you instruct your assistant district attorneys to approach plea bargaining? What types of principles would you put in place to guide the discretion, the extraordinary discretion that is in the hands of prosecutors every day?
So I'll jump off on that one. So I think discretion actually starts, I know we're talking about plea bargaining, it actually starts at charging, especially with mandatory sentencing in this state for those tough on crime policies we passed in the 90s that have exploded our prison population. You know, it's when the DA makes a charging decision, that really sets the path of what's going to happen down the road. And with mandatory sentencing and Measure 11 and Measure 57, you're setting up people to have a very coercive situation in terms of plea bargaining. So I think first you got to look at, don't just charge it because you can or you have a novel theory, but let's charge the things that we should be charging. For example, there are multiple levels of robbery. There are multiple levels of assault. Let's look at the circumstances and charge the right thing and not just charge the thing that is going to bring the highest penalty so that you can resolve the cases. It's actually one of the reasons we need to look at the funding of the district attorney's office. You get better results when you have more attorneys who are able to do the work and take a deep dive into their cases. And that's a serious challenge for this local district attorney's office.
Thank you, Mike. Ethan.
Well, I agree. My perspective that was informed by the fact that I've negotiated, pled, charged, and supervised tens of thousands of cases in my career. And I'll say at the outset, charging is important. And obviously, you have to do that right and ethically. And your question was, what would I instruct my attorneys to do? And that would be to follow those guidelines and follow the lead. I don't think it's inherently coercive to charge people with crimes. I think the bigger issue in addressing this issue is frankly making sure we're fully funding all the attorneys at the table, not just the prosecutors, but ensuring that there's pay parity with the public defender's office, to ensure that the investigation and advice, the legal advice, is fully vetted and reaches defendants. Because you always want to make sure there are options. People have an absolute right to go to trial, but it's only coercive if the facts are not properly there and if there's not adequate legal representation. So we want to work to make sure we have the fairest system possible, and to ensure that every attorney who's at the table is adequately representing the interests of that defendant.
All right, thank you for that, Ethan and Mike, both. You mentioned mandatory minimum sentencing, so a follow-up question to that. Mandatory minimum sentencing, including Measure 11 and Measure 57, prescribe a mandatory sentence for certain person crimes and give an incredible amount of power to district attorneys throughout the state of Oregon. My question is a very open-ended one, in that what is your view in power shifting to judges and defense counsel on issues like mandatory sentencing? Do you believe in power sharing or power shifting? Do you even believe there's an issue there? And I believe we're to Ethan first.
Well, that's a good question, because, in any system, you need a balance between all the parties, and needs to be fair and open. And so, Mike and I differ on Measure 11, but I think at the outset, we need to be mindful of the fact that there is a balance of power in the system, and make sure that judges, defense attorneys, and prosecutors all have, an equal say in how things are done. Now, the government and the state has the responsibility of charging and proving a crime. That's their burden. I don't think that it's inherently coercive necessarily to have that responsibility in that role. Mandatory minimum sentences should be used sparingly for the most serious offenders, and oftentimes they are, and they should continue to be, and we should be critical of any system and ensure that it's fair and balanced in that way. And the bottom line, I'll tell you on Measure 11, my view is that if you rape or murder someone, there should be a fixed sentence for that crime, and that it should not vary widely, and that those are the serious offenses for which we have prisons. But we should also have opportunities for folks not to get caught up in that sentencing scheme.
So Measure 11 was passed in the mid-90s by voters in 1994, at a time when crime was at one of the highest points across our country. We're not in that situation anymore, but what we've seen is that it's completely exploded our prison population, more than tripling the people that we have in custody in state prison, to the tune of now we're spending almost $2 billion a biennium on prisons. And at a time like this, when we're having a health crisis and we're stacking people in prison, we got to be thinking about what the costs of that policy are. There's been multiple research and studies done across the country about the diminishing returns of incarceration. We're the most incarcerative country in the entire world, and yet we're not the safest. So fundamentally, on mandatory sentencing, I say let the judges decide. That's what we elect judges for. Let them decide what the sentence is going to be, not the prosecutor when they make the charging decision and then they offer the plea deal. Ethan talks about parity across the system, and that's important. I understand that. But with 36 different elected DAs, you see 36 different results. When we've looked at this county by county, you see drastically different ways that Measure 11 is handled. So we're not achieving the parity that was promised to voters either.
Thank you both. I'm going to ask another question that relates to sentencing, and that is about the most draconian sentence that the state can impose on an individual, and that is the death penalty. It's another area where DAs have traditionally exercised discretion regarding whether or not to even seek the death penalty. Mike, I know you have said that you won't seek the death penalty. You said, and I'm quoting from a post of yours, "I oppose the death penalty. I believe it is wrong." and so the question for both of you is how you will handle capital punishment, and more importantly, more broadly, I should say, what it says about your understanding of how prosecutorial discretion works, because I can imagine many people out there saying, just because you believe something is wrong doesn't necessarily mean the people that you represent believe it is wrong. So if you could speak to that issue as well, that would be great. And Mike, we'll start with you.
Great. So yes, that's absolutely a position that I've taken in this race, that I will not seek the death penalty if elected. Fundamentally, I think the death penalty is a failed policy. We have a moratorium on this state. We've not sought the death penalty, or we've not imposed the death penalty for the last 11 years, and in fact, only twice in the last 60 years. What we know is that it's incredibly costly, and that sometimes, frankly, we get it wrong. About 170 some exonerations across the country, which equals about 1 in 9 people who have been sentenced to death row, end up having their conviction reversed. That's a 1 in 9 error rate. So fundamentally, and then when you look at how that cuts against people of color, people with diminished capacity, they're much more likely to end up with the death penalty than those who are not. Prosecutors decide all the time whether or not they'll seek the death penalty. It's called a plea deal. And so as long as you plea, they will agree not to seek the death penalty. It's when you exercise your right to trial that prosecutors seek to have the death penalty there. So it is absolutely something the prosecutor can decide not to seek. And that's why I like having this conversation. The voters get to decide. This is a key difference between me and my opponent. And so let them speak on this issue.
Prosecutors do not get to decide which laws they follow and which laws they don't follow. That's for Congress, and that's for the state legislature, and that's for the voters. One thing I've learned in 20 years is that, prosecutors are not politicians. They're not legislatures. They follow the law, and they do it on behalf of the community they represent. And the reality is, in Oregon right now, the death penalty is the law and is an option. The way it's written, it is very unlikely it will ever be imposed again. But I can't, with a straight face, say that I won't follow it because I know it's the law. Just like I'm not going to refuse to follow other laws I may not agree with, because that's not my job, and that's not the job of any lawyer who takes an oath to uphold the law. And that's pretty simple to me. And if the legislature, the people change the law, I'll be right there to follow the rules.
Great. Thank you very much. It is 1 o'clock, so we're going to move to questions that we have received from the audience. Please, if you're out there, continue to send them in. We've received dozens of terrific ones, and so we're going to bucket a lot of them because many of you have talked about specific issues. We'll kick off with one that several folks have mentioned about prosecution of police officers accused of excessive force, including deadly shootings. In many situations we've seen across the country, DAs have declined to prosecute these cases. And so the question for both of you is, how would you approach these cases? Should they be dealt with in a unique way, given the sensitivity and the relationship between DAs and police officers, or do you have another strategy? And Ethan, we'll start with you.
This is an extraordinarily sensitive and complicated question. Right now in Multnomah County, the county does something most of the other counties do not, and that is these cases are all presented to the grand jury. I would continue that practice. I think relative to other counties, it ensures maximum transparency, and that really is the key word, I think, for investigations of officer-involved shootings or other misconduct is transparency. That's for the legal process. And the reality is the job is to follow the law and make sure there's as much transparency as possible. I would not object if there's a true conflict of interest. Sometimes outside parties need to come in and handle those investigations. I've done public corruption work in the past. I know what those sensitivities are like. I know how to handle those investigations more than virtually anyone. But most importantly, I think we need to look on how to minimize the social trauma that gets us to the place where many of these incidents occur. Both former Chief Outlaw and Mayor Wheeler noticed that the last time we had an officer-involved shooting, this happened a long time downstream, and we need to focus on that social situation before we get to the place of a shooting.
Thank you.
So police accountability is absolutely crucial in our system. And quite frankly, from the communities that I've been talking to, and many of whom are supporting me in this race, they don't feel like that it's been there. And that's a big threat to our criminal justice system. When people are telling me that they won't call the police because they're scared of that, or that they don't think the police will be held accountable, that's a threat to everybody and to our criminal justice system. So how this is handled is crucial. Now, one of the issues has been with people in the community is that prosecutors and police oftentimes are friends. They work hand in hand. They get to know each other on a normal basis. They might play on the same softball team together, recreationally. And there's nothing wrong with that. They work together on a daily basis. But when it comes to holding police officers accountable, the public needs to be certain that that's not infecting the district attorney's views. I've called for independent outside prosecutions of those crimes by the Attorney General of the state of Oregon. I would go down to the legislature and advocate for that and work with that. I think it's important that we have an independent outside look at those situations.
All right, thank you both, and thank you both for your answers, and to the person who provided that one online. The next question that we have is from another outside question. Those that are currently incarcerated are impacted the most by your elected position, and their voices are imperative for meaningful reform. How will you ensure that the voting rights of those that are currently incarcerated are accessible in Oregon County jails? Elaborate, how will you ensure that they're informed of their rights and then register? And we'll start to you, Mike, please.
So voting rights. We're fortunate in Oregon that people do still have the right to vote if they're out of custody. And so if you're in prison, and I'm not positive it applies to jail, but you lose those rights. I had the privilege of going over to Norway to look at their criminal justice system and how they treat folks who are incarcerated. And their whole philosophy is the punishment is that you're in prison. That's the whole punishment. You don't lose all of your rights that go along with that. In the United States, I think we have a lot to learn from that. You lose all kinds of rights, and your felony conviction keeps you from other opportunities, jobs, employment, housing, all those things. There are states, I believe, maybe Maine and Vermont, that allow people who are incarcerated to vote. I think if we want people to successfully reintegrate back into society, they might be people who have never thought about voting before. Getting them civically engaged while they're not doing much else in our prisons actually, to me, seems like a good public safety thing to get people involved in our system. So I would support that change in the law.
Yeah, I think convicted felons should have the right to vote, and I'd certainly explore extending that option to folks who are incarcerated. But I think there's a larger issue here we need to focus on, and that is reentry. We can talk about things like voting, but the most significant thing we need to also focus on is how do we effectively help folks re-enter into society so they don't recidivate? Because that really is the essential question of corrections. I mean, if people are dangerous and they go to prison and they serve their time, that's fine. But we want to ensure they don't go back and they're productive, healthy members of society. So, I've talked about the need to have more robust community justice programming, to have more robust supervision, to have more robust expungement programming, all those things to ensure that we get folks out of the system for good. So voting's a piece of that, but really reentry services is a more profound and important piece of that discussion.
Thank you both. Next question has to do with one of the most important managerial aspects of your job, which is handling an office full of assistant district attorneys. And the question is, please describe your perfect assistant or deputy district attorney. What makes them good at their job? What types of values do they have, and how do they relate to your own? Ethan, we'll start with you.
I think, the perfect prosecutor is someone who recognizes they're not perfect and that the system isn't perfect, and has the humility to understand they have an incredibly powerful and important job, and it's their job to follow the law and not to take their own ideology, their own politics, any of that into the courtroom, and appreciates that they're dealing with human beings at the end of the day. And so that they're thoughtful, prepared, honest, but more importantly, they realize that every decision they make has an impact on someone's life, whether it be the victim, the defendant, the other people in the courtroom. And I really think that humility and that sense of being just and right is the most important characteristic that one can carry into that job. And I've worked over 20 years in the state and federal system with some tremendous people, and I've tried to look for what are those characteristics that make someone good at that job and make them care and make them effective. And I think those are the characteristics that matter most.
So I think first and foremost, it's going to be this district attorney's job to ensure more diversity in the office, and that people with diverse experiences and different backgrounds are coming into these important decisions. You know, my experience of being a high school teacher has very much impacted the way that I see the criminal justice system from what I saw through my students' eyes. And so I want people that have that kind of experience and have more diverse experiences than I do in the office to make sure that we're getting that into the way that they're making decisions. Secondly, you know, I think the office needs to do a really good job of giving opportunities for deputy DAs to get into the community. Since leaving the office, when I was in the office, I never toured a prison. I think I might have toured the jail once. Never talked to people who are incarcerated. I think it's incumbent upon the next DA to expose the deputies to those situations and hear from the people frontline, like I have since I've been out, of what works and what doesn't work for them. Why do some people become successful? Why do some people not? And also be involved in the community and getting out there and talk to people and being a part of that. So those are the DAs I'm looking for.
Okay, thank you both for those answers. I have another one from online that was just recently added. It's very simple and straightforward. How will you keep transgender women safe in jail, knowing they're one of our most vulnerable populations of people in society generally? And that would be to you first.
So yeah, I'm happy to say that Colette Peters, who's our director of the Department of Corrections, has really done a lot of groundbreaking work on this issue, and that states from around the country come to Oregon to decide and to determine what policies they should have in place to keep people safe. So Oregon is on the cutting edge of leadership in this area, but we absolutely need to make sure first and foremost the safety of people that are taken into our care and custody, and making sure that we are being respectful and accommodating in what they need in services. I should also say there are certain populations that we know LGBTQ, especially youth, are overrepresented in, and that talks to people who are homeless and living on the streets are overrepresented, are LGBTQ overrepresented. So also being mindful of what types of crimes we're prosecuting, how we are prosecuting them, how we are taking them into the system, and what are the goals? What are we trying to accomplish with those prosecutions? I think all go into taking into account how we treat people.
Thank you. Good question. And I would do three specific things. The first, I would be a public advocate for ensuring there is separate and safe housing for folks who are transgender in the criminal justice system. While the DA alone cannot do that, that's what I would do. The second piece is in the courtroom, specifically when a sentence is imposed, I would not object, nor would my deputies object, to ensuring instructions are made in the judgment that somebody is protected and safe in a custodial setting. And that's a small mechanical thing to many, but that really has an impact on people when that recommendation can be jointly made to protect someone in custody. And I say lastly, and this is a little bit of the flip side of the question, as I've talked about increasing the number of prosecutions for hate crimes. And this doesn't focus on folks who are incarcerated, but it talks about and speaks to helping protect vulnerable populations. And that is so much of what a prosecutor does. It speaks to the most vulnerable and for the most vulnerable. So I would increase the number of prosecutions of hate crimes targeted at folks who are transgender.
Thank you. We have time for one more question from the audience, and then we'll go to the closing statements. There's so many questions, so I apologize to those that we weren't able to ask, but we'll follow up. The question has to do with diversion programs, specifically involving individuals who are suffering from mental illness and or addiction. The question is to talk about the specifics of the types of programs you would support and how you see diversion contributing to a more just criminal justice system in Multnomah County. Ethan, I think you're up first here.
Thank you. Diversion programs play a critical role in dealing with addiction and mental illness, particularly on lower level offenses. I helped start the community court program nearly 20 years ago, which at the time was a novel diversion program. But now, obviously, we have a number of programs throughout the state and in Multnomah County that deal with diversion, mental health court, drug court, START court, all of those different programs. So I support them. But I will say, the problem is we do not adequately support those programs. Many of them exist in name only, and to truly and effectively implement and support diversion programs, the county's going to have to step up and more robustly support the community justice program, so that when we have someone with mental illness in the system, we can help get them the treatment they need on an ongoing basis. If somebody has addiction issues, we can have inpatient treatment available. These things are not effective in name only. They need sustained support. So I think Mike and I agree diversion is a great thing. I just think we need to do a better job of recognizing how to sustain it long term.
So yeah, the treatment courts, there's actually a statute that allows for DA diversion that I think isn't used as much as it could be. My agency actually funds over 40 of the treatment courts across the country, including all the ones that Ethan just listed off. So we do the research on those, we evaluate those courts, and then we fund and support those. And I've been a big advocate testifying to the legislature every single time that I get the opportunity that more and more funding needs to go there. I'll talk about specifically, because the question was about behavioral health or mental health in our criminal justice system. Like I started from the outset of this conversation, we need to recognize that our jails and our prisons have become our largest homeless shelters, mental health treatment facilities, addiction recovery facilities, and that is just absolutely backwards. So DA diversion plays an absolutely crucial role in changing the way that we're allocating our resources, which is really inefficient and incredibly expensive, and we get really terrible results. The state hospital is completely overcrowded. So it's going to take someone that's worked with all the leaders across those systems to really change and get some more funding.
Thank you both. We are now at the time for closing statements. Mike, we're going to have you up first. So 2-minute close.
All right. Well, thank you, City Club, and everybody participating online for your questions. This is obviously an incredibly important race and an incredibly challenging time for our community. So I'm happy that you all took the time to look at this. You know, like I said, what's working in our things are not working in our criminal justice system. I think we need some major reform right now. We need to protect vulnerable communities. We need to hold police officers accountable. We need to give people, if they're doing the right things and not committing crimes, we need to give them an opportunity to get their records clear and they can get back into society and being contributing members. And fundamentally, our prison system is completely out of control in terms of how many people we're sending, and we're spending so much money, and that's at the expense of healthcare, education, mental health, all the challenges that we know. That Oregon's ranking last in the nation in addiction, last in the nation in resources for mental health, and that we have some of the highest challenges in those areas. So we need to fundamentally rebalance the way that we're doing things. I'm very proud to have the support of an extremely broad array of community stakeholders, the teachers, Safety and Justice Oregon, NARAL Pro-Choice Oregon, former governors, the entire county commission, the sheriff. These are all folks that are supporting me because they actually know me. They've been working with me for years. I've never left the state system. I've been in the state system for about a dozen years now, just working at different levels. And I think it's absolutely crucial that the person who gets elected to this race has the ability to work with all those groups and work across all of our sectors to realize that the answer to every single one of society's problems is not a prosecution, that there are other answers that we can use to get better results instead of going down that same path. And so if elected DA, that is a diverse community that I think I will work really well with, as I have in the past, to look at how we can address all the different challenges in our system. So I really appreciate this opportunity today to talk to you all, and appreciate your vote in May.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Thank you, City Club, for the opportunity, and thank you, Mike. Good to see you again in a digital format. You know, I just want to say this is a tremendously important election and an important time. And more now than ever, we need a professional to do this job, and I'm a professional. That's where my support is. I'm proud to be supported by the current district attorney, unanimously supported by the union representing those attorneys, the first responders in our community, the former attorney general, U.S. attorney, and a broad array of folks in the business community, in the community at large, and in the legal community. Because at the end of the day, I don't believe we need to tear the entire system down. I think we can agree there are changes we need to make, there are reforms we need to make, but there's also a lot that we do well. And the reality is, to best effectively address the needs of the criminal justice system, to represent the people of Multnomah County in the challenging months and years we have ahead, we need someone who's a professional and recognizes how to make those changes within the system and how to improve upon what we already have in the system. And I'm that person. You know, the reality is we do need to do a better job of ensuring that the cases we do prosecute are prosecuted well, that the folks with addiction and mental illness, if they're in the system, they belong in the system, and that we get them what they need so they don't come back to the system. But we also have a responsibility to keep everyone in the community safe. The most vulnerable among us, the most underserved among us, and those who traditionally would be not acknowledged by any part of the system. And that's what I've done for 20 years at virtually every level. And that's what I intend to do when I work on behalf of Multnomah County starting next year. So thank you again for your time and your support. And I look forward to having support in May as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to the candidates. Thank you, CJ. Thank you to all of you community members who are tuning in virtually. We really appreciate it. As I mentioned, civic engagement is more important now than ever. And so if you're not a member of City Club, I want to personally invite you to join us. Everyone has a seat at this table. Everyone is needed here. And while our regular membership rate is $165 a year, given these unparalleled circumstances, you get a discounted membership if you sign up right now. It's only $8 a month. Just go to pdxcityclub.org to sign up for a membership with the promo code ICarePDX. I think I mentioned a different promo code earlier. Both work. So ICarePDX. And so whether you're a member or just thinking about becoming one, we welcome your feedback, especially with this new format. Send us questions. Email us at questions@pdxcityclub.org or using social media. You can find us as well. Let's find out what's possible when we truly make space for everyone to connect, share ideas, and build for the future, even in our virtual public square. Thank you so much, and we are adjourned.